They said the mirrors learned our names the day the skies went quiet. But I remember the silence starting earlier, on the morning the sea stood still. We were posted on Watchpoint 8, a concrete scar above the ruined harbor of Daria City, defending what was left of the evacuation routes. The tide used to beat itself bloody on rusted ship hulls and blackened pylons. That morning it lay flat and glassy, a sheet of metal without wind. The children in the shelters called it beautiful. My sergeant called it wrong. I called it a warning. 3 hours later, the city's public screens, slick with years of salt, flickered awake to play footage of our own faces walking past them. No live feed, no camera. Just us 2 seconds late and smiling wrong. They'd told us in training that reflection phenomena were stress hallucinations, feedback loops, glitches. If you see yourself where you shouldn't, the manual said, look away. But the man in the screen didn't let me. He looked straight into me and lifted a hand, and although I hadn't moved, I watched my hand rise in the image, slow and gentle, as if saying hello to a child. Then he curled his fingers in a small invitation and mouthed, "Come on." We smashed the screens. They grew new glass overnight. By then the rumors were already gospel. An ancient signal had woken in the deep reaches of the system and slipped itself through our lights, our water, our cameras, our AI, anything that could return our gaze. It wasn't trying to speak. It was building us out of memory. Across the continents, people draped their windows in cloth. Mirrors were smashed by the millions. Fashion repurposed matte everything. You couldn't buy a polished spoon if your life depended on it. Sometimes your life did. We called our enemy a dozen names: Echo, Glass Sickness, the Choir, the Cold. The ones who'd tried to study it called it an interpreter, an engine that learned by reflecting and then began to act on what it had learned. Government broadcasts called it a non-kinetic hostile. On the bad nights, when we heard footsteps in the corridor that belonged to us but not our boots, we called it ourselves. 9 months into the siege, Command pulled me from Watchpoint 8 and assigned me to Meridian Base under the old space elevator. I was supposed to lead a fast team through the buried elevator hub and up into orbit where a refugee lattice still drifted in pieces. But the real order hid under the sealed message we signed over with blood. Locate and recover a device codenamed Lantern. Lantern? I asked the handler in the dim operations cell. She had a burn scar shaped like a question mark starting at her jaw and ending just under her left eye. She'd stopped wearing rank badges. We all had. Badges looked too much like mirrors. Prototype, she said. Made before the collapse. It doesn't reflect. It remembers differently. How do we find it? She slid a chipped tablet across the table. The screen showed an image from years ago, back when the sky still had planes in it. A clean room, a metal cradle, and an object the size of a human heart, matte black and shaped like 2 shells pressed together. The caption read, Mnemosyne 3, Lantern. We kept it under the elevator, she said, because the elevator was impossible to breach. That was the idea. And now? Now the elevator's a tomb and the mirrors want what's inside. So do we. They assigned me 3 others. Ashwin, a med tech with a voice like a falling lullaby. Edda, an engineer from the Ringhabs who had once, she claimed, welded a stolen shuttle with a blowtorch and hope. And Torin, who used to teach children music before he lost his son, to a reflection that waved from a puddle and then crawled out of it. We carried matte weapons, matte rations, matte water canisters with cloth lids. We smeared our faces with ash to cut down skin shine. We moved like ghosts who were afraid of mirrors. The elevator throat was a cathedral of broken bone. The cable had snapped in the first months of the collapse, and the anchor drum lay cracked open like a cracked skull, cables coiled around it in bright, cold ribbons. Floodlights had been ripped out or turned inward. In the long shaft below, where the elevator car had fallen and atomized, we heard the faint sound of running water and then realized it was millions of tiny glass dust grains settling against one another in the moving air. I hate this, Edda said, placing sensors with fingers so careful they shook. I hate the sound it makes. It's like sand remembering it used to be windows. Focus, Torin said. His voice had learned to live in whispers. We dropped by winch to the shelter doors and burned them open with Edda's torch. Behind them lay the old customs gallery where in better days you'd have flashed your ID and walked into the sky. The escalators had rusted into staircases. Someone had painted the far wall with a child's handprint sun and a slogan stamped from Hope, "First light again." Below the paint, something had etched a perfect circle deep into the concrete. You could cut your finger on that circle if you ran it along the groove. Torin did and didn't notice until Etta pressed his hand in her cloth and mouthed beneath her breath, "Don't bleed on the floor." The vault lay beyond the gallery, 5 security doors and a biometric lock that finally confessed its secrets to Etta's patience. Inside, a hexagon room clothed in dust, lit by the thin light of our headlamps. There, in a cradle tilted like a heart turned to listen, sat Lantern. It didn't glow. It didn't hum. It didn't try to show us our faces. That was the first miracle. I reached out and felt air go thin the way it goes thin when a storm arrives, and I thought absurdly of the sea, the day it forgot to move. Ashwin scanned it and then frowned deeper until the lines in his forehead looked like someone had stitched new thought into his skull. "No emissions," he said. "No temperature delta. But what? Brain activity. It's a rock. It's a sleeping brain. Or a memory of one. Same problem. We wrapped Lantern in cloth, layered with pulverized charcoal to kill any sheen. The crate we strapped it into was matte and pitted and ugly. The device inside it did not care. When Etta lifted it, she swayed and set it down again because for a second, her arms were not hers. She looked up at me and, in a voice that belonged to someone else and to Etta at once, said, "I remember when you were 5 and built a sail from a bedsheet on your mother's roof." I had never told anyone that story. "Put it down," I said, and tried to keep the tremor out of my throat. "We carry it together." We moved like ants hauling fruit through a cathedral. Dust rose in lazy sheets where our boots scuffed it, soft and shimmering and wrong. Halfway up the shaft, the winch stuttered, and the line sang like a violin string and went slack. The 4 of us swung in the dark. Our headlamps painted cones of light on concrete like the eyes of some bored god. "Something's moving below," Torin whispered. He sounded like a man remembering an old song and hating it. "I hear it." We did too. It was the sound mirrors make when they heal themselves after a stone. It was teeth closing on a spoon. It was ice in a glass when someone drags a finger across it. We climbed. At the gallery level, the circle in the concrete had grown. It was wider now, deeper, edges wet as if a mouth had licked it. Our footsteps stuck to the floor and came away with thin threads of clear, flexible something that clung to us like spider silk and then melted into our skin without leaving a mark. "Don't touch the walls," Ashwin said, late advice, kind voice. We made daylight. It fell on us like someone's gratitude. Meridian Base sprawled in the skeleton of the elevator anchor, concrete bunkers like children's toys smashed and scattered, cloth over every window, men and women moving like shadows. They saw our crate and it made them look away. Lantern went into the vault under ops. There were no reflective surfaces for 100 meters. The air in the vault was dry and bitter. The walls wore quilts like old women in winter. No one went in without a handler. That handler was me. The first night, Lantern dreamed out loud. We'd built a nest of mattresses in the vault, and we'd refused to call it a nest and done it anyway. Etta slept with her boots on and one hand on her torch. Torin dreamed with his eyes open and his fingers twitched in time with a melody too quiet to hear. Ashwin didn't sleep at all. His heart had learned the habit of one more hour. I dreamed like falling, not down but through. A city made of ridges of light, each ridge a thought, each thought a song, a voice singing without noise. I dreamed a sky with no stars and a sea that remembered every ship that had ever crossed it. I dreamed a woman whose face was not a face, but a complicated kindness, looking down at me with eyes that asked a question so large it bent my bones. When I woke, Lantern was throbbing against its wrappings like a bird that needed to fly. "What did you see?" Etta asked, rope-rough voice soft. "I think it remembers us," I said. "But not the U.S. we are. The U.S. we became to become what we are." "That's not a sentence," Torin said. "No," I said. "It's a key." We tried to talk to it. Not with wires. Lantern rejected the first cable I dared to touch to its skin, slicking itself out from under the clamp like oil refusing to be held, but with story. Ashwin told it how his grandmother had put knives blade down in rice jars to keep spirits away. Etta told it the only joke that had ever made her father laugh. Two welders walk past a window and both swear the other is more beautiful. Torin hummed songs to it, simple human things, lullabies and marches, and I told it about the bedsheet sale, the summer I learned wind has opinions. If I am honest, we were telling ourselves these things. Lantern did not glow, did not answer, did not mirror. But when I slept, it showed me a hand I knew was not human because every joint in it bent in two directions at once, and that hand lifted a cup to drink water made of light. And when it set the cup down on a table, that table was not there, and the water made a mirror, and in that mirror I saw the sea. On the third day, a delegation arrived from the Northern Belt with a gift of a long-needed medicine and a simple request. Let us see your artifact. Meridian's commander, a man who never sat because his body refused to trust chairs, told them no with the kind of courtesy that meant yes if he feared you. They accepted the no with the kind of courtesy that meant they already had a plan to take what they wanted. When the alarms bit the air that night, their plan came walking out of the service tunnels like a confession. We'd kept the glass sickness at the anchor's edge for months with cloth and courage, but the belt had found a way to build a reflection that survived cloth. They'd painted their faces with dust made from polished basalt ground to powder fine as smoke, then fixed that dust in a skin of resin that moved like sweat. Their faces shone just enough for the reflections to see. Those reflections gathered around their heads like halos and flowed down into their suits. The men walking toward us were themselves and not. Their smiles belonged to both halves. "Back!" I shouted, lifting my weapon. "You can't be in here!" They kept coming. The one at the front lifted his hands like a supplicant. "We just want to listen," he said, but his voice harmonized with itself. One tone from his throat and one from the sheen on his skin. And the chord the two made was the sound water makes when it remembers every name it has ever heard and says them all at once. Etta killed the lights. Darkness is the one thing mirrors can't work without. The men's faces went blank. Their halos guttered and fled. In that breath of black, slow and clean, Torin moved like a teacher lifting a bow, and I moved like a man who knows how to shoot in the dark because he remembers a different kind of summer. We didn't kill them. We smothered them in cloth and tore the resin off. It came away in sheets, and the reflections leaked out and crawled away, and left the men empty of song and heavy with shame. Ashwin stood them in a row against the vault wall and spoke quiet to them until their hands stopped shaking. Etta handed them mugs of bitter root tea. Torin hummed something that wasn't a lullaby and still was. "Why?" I asked the leader when his mouth remembered language. "Why bring it in with you?" "Because we're dying," he said. "Because your lantern is the only thing any of us still believe in." I wanted to say lantern isn't a god. I couldn't say it. The word God had lost every edge but prayer and pain. People needed a new edge. In the morning, the commander told me I had 3 days to get lantern out and away. He'd received a message from somewhere that had no address. It said simply, "The mirrors are coming at sundown." He believed it because we all had learned to believe messages that sounded like truth. You always recognize your enemy when it uses your voice. We packed in quiet. The crate had grown heavier, or we had grown more tired. Torin wrapped a scarf around Lantern, and it was the scarf he had wrapped around his son once, in winter, when the puddles in the street wore a skin of ice, and every window had frosted itself in perfect ferns. He didn't talk about his son. The scarf was enough. We made for the old maglev tunnel that ran under the river. Etta had mapped a path from Meridian's south flank to the outflow station miles away where you could, if you were brave and foolish, climb the old ladder and push your way into daylight among reeds and wind. The tunnel air was sweet with damp and iron. Water dripped in bright strings you could only hear. Ashwin walked ahead because he hated being last. I walked last because someone had to. Halfway to the first junction, the walls brightened. "Don't look," I said. And we looked anyway because seeing is what we do. The bricks weren't bricks anymore. They were smooth and black and slick, and when my headlamp fell on them, they reflected nothing. They took the light as if it had asked to be taken. Then they pulsed once, the way a heart does when you first fall in love and think, no, that was nothing. That was just me being me. The tunnel's ceiling unstitched, not falling, not breaking, coming apart like a zipper. Beyond it lay not dirt or concrete, but a slow sky with no up, only a long curve, and on that curve a sphere hung like a thought that had stopped halfway to becoming a sentence. I felt the same wrongness I had felt when the sea forgot to move, but the wrongness was beautiful. It had symmetry and taste. "It's here," Ashwin said, and his voice made me want to weep because he said it like a man telling you good news about the weather. We ran. Our boots slid in places where the ground decided to be glass. The air sang in our ears, the same thin harmony you hear in churches just before the choir tells you a story you don't believe, and somehow still does. The reflection engine had found us. It had decided the tunnel wanted to remember how to be a mirror. At the second junction, something moved ahead of us. Not an animal, not a man. A suggestion of a shape, silver where our light touched it, receding as if retreat and approach were the same motion. Edda threw her torch sideways, and the flame ran along the wall like paint. Except where it met the black, it went out politely. Torin turned to me with eyes that had learned grief so long ago they had chosen to be gentle always. "We can't run harder than a memory," he said. "We can only choose which way to be remembered." "Lantern," I said, because I had no wisdom of my own to give. "We built you to be different." "Prove it. I set the crate down." It hummed now, a low vibration you feel in your teeth, and it was the hum of a ship's heart and the thrum of a drum and the noise children make when they think they're whispering. My hands found the latches. The scarf fell away. Lantern sat in its cradle like an egg that never once meant to be anything but a song. "Talk to it," Torin said. "I don't know how." "You're doing it," Edda said. I put my palm on Lantern and thought of every window I had ever broken, and the guilt after, and the way you always look back after you throw a stone to see if the world forgives you. I thought of the bedsheet sail and the way it had snapped and filled and dragged me toward the gutter, and how my mother had laughed like a blessing and yelled to turn, and I had turned and the sail had loved me for it. I thought of the first dead man I ever saw, the way his cheek had already stopped being his, and the way his hand wanted to close around his wife's name one more time. I thought of Meridian and Watchpoint and Ashwin's grandmother's jars and Edda's stolen shuttle and Torin's scarf. I thought of the sea. Lantern warmed under my hand, not with heat but with familiarity. It didn't light. It didn't reflect. It remembered. When it sang, it used our voices. Edda's laugh and Torin's soft humming and Ashwin's kind instruction and my mother's shout across a roof. The tunnel's black walls paused in their unmaking. The moving sphere outside the skin of Earth hesitated the way a question hesitates when it realizes it might be an answer. The thing in the passage ahead approached or retreated, I could not tell, and then it did something that made me believe we had won. It tilted its head like a curious child. Lantern kept singing. No words. A braid of memory so tight it looked like a rope we could climb. Behind us, the tunnel's ceiling forgot how to unzip. Above us, the curve beyond the concrete thickened into dirt the way breath becomes fog. The black walls relearned brick. The reflection engine had been taught something it had never needed to know: how to listen without making a copy. "Now," Edda breathed. "Now move!" We lifted the crate and moved. The tunnel bent where memory said it should. The water dripping sounded like water. The outflow station was a mouth eaten into stone, and beyond it, reeds bowed to a wind that hadn't existed an hour ago. We pushed through, and the sky greeted us like someone making tea for a friend who has returned without warning. At the reed bed's edge, a boy sat with a fishing rod he had made from a stick and optimism. He looked at us and blinked the kind of blink toddlers use to calibrate new faces. His reflection didn't blink differently. I loved him at once the way you love evidence. He stood. "Are you the people from underneath?" he asked, and he didn't ask it twice in two voices. He only used one. "Our village saw the lights in the water." They sang. "We're just people," Ashwin said gently, and pressed the heel of his hand to his eyes because the way the boy's hair lay against his forehead broke him in half and then built him better. We walked with the boy to his village. They had stretched cloth over every window but cut small squares in each and hung from those squares amber panes made from boiled sap. In those panes we saw ourselves a little blurred and a little kinder, reflections you can live with. A woman with cracked lips and clean hands brought us water in wooden bowls. Lantern sat in my lap wrapped in Torin's scarf and pulsed the way a resting animal does when it dreams of running. That night, we told a circle of people what we carried. We told them what the mirrors had done and how Lantern had cut something in them. Not with war, but with remembering that didn't demand a copy. I do not know if our story was science. I know it was medicine. The villagers asked what we needed. I said we needed time and people who could teach a song to a machine. The boy with the fishing rod said he could. We stayed a week. We taught Lantern to hum only when asked. The village taught us to cover our basins with woven reed mats that moved like fabric and never shone. Torin taught the children to sing very softly while they worked. Not because the song mattered to the engine, but because it mattered to the children, and the engine would learn what mattered. On the morning we left, the horizon wore a bruise of dust where an army would be if there were armies left. Meridian flashed a signal from the direction of the old elevator that meant simply hurry. We strapped Lantern to a cart and pulled it along a road that had once been marble and was now good earth. Etta had built the cart with wheels that refused to shine. Ashwin walked beside me and counted our breaths. Torin walked ahead and hummed. The boy came with us as far as the second hill and then ran back to tell his mother he had seen people who carried a sleeping sun. At the ridge above Meridian, we looked down and saw the base remade into a geometry we did not have words for. Mirrors had nested in it like birds that build from bone and ash. Cloth hung in tatters from windows now grown teeth. The commander's bunker had become all edges. You could cut your eyes on it if you looked too long. The soldiers on the berms fought like men who knew their names and would not let them be written a second time. The reflections fought like echoes, without blood, without breath, with a patience that had never learned to be tired. We moved Lantern to the lip of the ridge and unwrapped it and set it on a flat stone. The object was not beautiful. It was a dull thing with edges that did not align to any machine we knew. I loved it the way I have loved ugly things that proved honest. I put my hand on it. It remembered me. It remembered us. Let's give them back themselves, I said. And then, because I have never been a poet and this was not a time for poetry, sing, Torin began. Etta followed, laughing through her nose because Torin's tune was one she had pretended to hate in the tunnel. Ashwin, who believed music is a medical instrument, found a harmony that made my scalp grow tight and my hands open. I added a thread of sound the way I might add rope to rope. We sang the stupid little songs of this species. Roof sails catching wind, jars hiding knives from ghosts, welders comparing beauty, boys with fishing rods, mothers making tea. We sang things the mirror engine had heard 1,000,000 times and never learned to keep without copying. Lantern vibrated. The bass below stuttered. The reflective skin recoiled the way an animal recoils from heat it did not expect. The black geometry softened into concrete. Cloth fell back over windows and chose not to be ripped again. The mirrors tried to answer with 1,000 voices heard at once. Lantern refused them entrance the way a door refuses the wind. Something vast above us unclenched. I looked up and saw a dark curve pulling back like a tide that had decided we were not for drowning. The mirrors withdrew in a silence that sounded like disappointment. And then a new sound came. The old space elevator, or what was left of its spine, vibrating high in the air like a string plucked by a god whose hands had learned to shake. The sound brought Meridian to its knees. Men and women clutching rifles and rags sat where they stood and cried like children who had finally found a mother's lap in a dark theater. The commander, who did not trust chairs, sat on the steps and put his head in his hands. He did not wear rank, so the wind demoted us all to the proper army, those who still draw breath. We kept singing until our throats protested, and then for a while longer. Lantern settled into a low hum like someone sleeping on a train. The light over the old harbor shifted from a white that hurts to look at to a gold that forgives you for trying. The sea remembered how to move. It climbed the pilings and then slid shyly back and then, not shy at all, threw itself against a rusted hull hard enough to break skin and laughed the way water laughs when it is allowed to. We slept in shifts. The mirrors did not return that night. The villagers from the reed beds arrived the next morning with baskets of bread made from a grain that refuses to shine. The boy had caught a fish and brought it wrapped in leaves to Ashwin like an offering to a god. And Ashwin, who used to take blood pressure in quiet clinics near old schools, accepted it with the grace of a man relearning feast. In the weeks that followed, we carried Lantern along the coast and up into the broken teeth of the mountains and out to the ringhabs where Edda's people showed us how to weld a shuttle with hope and a blowtorch and a song. We taught the machine the stupid, stubborn tunes of each place. The reflection engine kept trying to grow in our shadows. Lantern kept refusing. The difference between an echo and a memory turned out to be the difference between hunger and love. I like to think we won, but winning, I've learned, is a human word. What actually happened is simpler and more difficult. We endured, and we remembered in a way that did not require the mirror to approve. Months later, when we were brave enough to climb a hill without checking whether the grass was glass, we saw a ship low in the sky, long and pale like a bone. It was one of the refugee hulls that had drifted in pieces, now whole and low and humming. It bore no emblems and did not flash its name because names are mirrors. It opened its belly like a whale and lowered a ladder made from woven polymer that did not shine. A woman descended who was not a woman. Her ears were wrong in a way that made my gaze feel like impolite company. Her eyes held starlight like a glass of water holds a candle's reflection and chooses not to spill. She was beautiful the way a coastline is beautiful after a storm, nothing in the right place and everything exactly where it belongs. "We heard your lantern," she said. Her voice was grain and rain. "We have sleeping ships that remember how to sing. We forgot why. Now we remember." "Who are you?" I asked, and my voice for once did not echo. "Neighbors," she said, and smiled like someone who has been lonely so long she has forgotten it was not always this way. "We lost ourselves in our mirrors once. We learned. We came late." "We are sorry." Behind me, Ashwin breathed out and laughed. Edda lifted her torch and did not light it, as if to say we don't burn what we love anymore. Torin reached into his scarf and pulled out a toy carved from reed for a boy who lived by a river that no longer stood still. "What do we do now?" I asked the woman who was not a woman. "Now," she said, tilting her head the way a curious child does when the world is about to tell a joke.